pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please remain standing for our invocation. Welcome. Come on forward to the microphone. We've got Terry Stevens here from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Welcome, Mr. Stevens.
Thank you. Our dear Heavenly Father, we are thankful for the many blessings we have in our life. We're especially thankful for this wonderful country of which we live in, and thankful for this community that we have here to live in. We ask Thee, dear Heavenly Father, to bless this meeting tonight, that the Spirit will be here to guide and direct those in attendance and those town council leaders, that the Spirit will be here to guide and direct them in their decisions. We're thankful for the good leaders we have. We're thankful for the many blessings we have in our life. We say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much. Roll call, please.
Mayor Schlum,
Here.
Councilmember Contino,
Here.
Councilmember Dickey, Vice Mayor Brown, Councilmember Leger, Councilmember Leger. He must not be with us yet.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to find him.
Councilmember Hanson, Councilmember Elke,
Here.
Councilmember Leger.
Here.
All right. Councilman Leger is attending via phone tonight. Welcome, Councilman Leger. All right, Mayor's report this evening. We've got a packed agenda, 2 birthdays. So I'm just lift up Councilmember Kathy Hanson. Happy birthday. No, you're not. And Councilmember Ginny Dickey, happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
Yes. So we'll have cake later. And moving on to call to the public. Do we have any speaker cards?
No, sir.
All right, thank you. We're going to take item, it's been requested to take item for the consent agenda 3 off, and we'll put that at the top of the regular agenda, leaving us 2 items on our consent agenda. Item number 1 is consideration of approving the council meeting minutes from November 9th, 2010 and January 6th, 2011. And item 2 is consideration of appointing subcommittees to conduct interviews to fill vacancies on the town boards and commissions as follows. Vice Mayor Brown and Council Members Dickey and Elke for McDowell Mountain Preservation Commission, Public Safety Advisory Commission and Board of Adjustment, and Council Members Contino, Hanson, and Leger for Parks and Recreation Commission, Senior Services Advisory Commission, Community Center Advisory Commission, and the Strategic Planning Advisory Commission. May I get a motion to accept the consent agenda?
So moved.
All in favor? I got a first and a second, I think.
Second.
Contino and Hanson. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Or roll call. Sorry, roll call on that one.
Councilmember
Please,
Dickey.
Aye.
Mayor Schlum,
Aye.
Councilmember Leger,
It's probably muted.
Councilmember Leger,
Here.
Councilmember Hanson,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Brown,
Aye.
Councilmember Contino,
Aye.
Councilmember Elke.
Aye.
All right, thank you. Moving on to the regular agenda, item number 3, consideration of accepting a bronze sculpture titled Return to Pi and approving the placement location. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you.
I'll put you on the spot. How do you pronounce that?
Return to Paya, I was told.
Hiya. Okay.
Hiya.
Thank you.
We also figured if we mispronounced it, nobody else in the room would know.
P-U-Y-E. P-U-Y-E.
As the picture demonstrates, this is a bronze sculpture that's not full-sized. It is being recommended for acceptance by the Public Art Committee. Placement would be as the map that was included in your packet shows, in back of, approximately right in the back of Plaza or Euro Pizza. It is a site that's included under revised Public Art Master Plan, which is also attached. And the piece itself is done by Native American sculptor Doug Hyde, has a value of $15,000. And because the piece is being donated, the cost of the piece, the plaque, and the installation costs would be borne, of course, by the donor, and the town would have no funds involved in this, other than the annual insurance costs, as we typically have. Also included in your packet is a letter from Public Art Committee Chair Sandy Thompson, who also has a few words to say.
Good, thank you, Mark. Welcome, Sandy Thompson, welcome.
Members of the council and Mayor Schlum. The reason we asked you to take this off the consent agenda is because Return to Paya has been donated by a wonderful family in town, the Lorenzes, Roland and Jean Lorenz, and I personally wanted to, or publicly wanted to, thank them for donating this great piece by artist Doug Hyde, who is a Native American. This is the third work that the Lorenzes have donated to the town. The other two are Last Doll, located near Splash Park, and Santa Clara Wedding Vase Gift, which is outside the museum. The Heard Museum has several others of Mr. Hyde's sculptures in their permanent collection, so we're in very good company. In any case, thank you, Jean and Roland Lorenz, for your outstanding generosity, and thank you, Town Council, for accepting this beautiful work of art.
Well, thank you, the Civic and Cultural Association, for working so hard to build such a great supply of artwork here for the guests and our residents to experience during their visits here or time strolling around town. It's quite a display, and we're so generous as well, Town Council, for the generous donations to the public art. As folks know, 90+% of the artwork in Fountain Hills, the public art, has all been donated, and we're very fortunate for that.
Well, and we certainly appreciate everyone that has donated in many ways, and the council and you as well. So thank you very much.
Good, thank you very much. Well, let's go ahead and get a motion to accept the bronze sculpture titled Return to Paya and approve the location. All right, got a motion by Councilmember Hanson, a second by Councilmember Brown. Any speaker cards on this item?
No, sir.
Any other questions or dialogue on that item? Councilmember Rauke.
Thank you. I just want to take the opportunity, I know, Mayor, you've already thanked Roland and Jean for their donation, but I sincerely appreciate the donation that they've made, especially after speaking with former Mayor Miles, that they've donated the other two pieces, which we've heard from Sandy tonight. And I think, as I told Jerry on the way in here, when somebody gives you $20,000, it's important to say thank you. So thank you, Sandy and Jerry, and for encouraging us to take this off. And thank you again, Jean and Roland, very much.
Yep, good. Thank you very much. All right, we've got a motion and a second. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Mayor, 7-0.
We heard you, Councilmember Leger. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, item number 4, consideration resolution 2011-07 relating to the Fountain Hills Centennial Circle Project. Mark?
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. Several weeks ago, Mr. Miles was here and brought a concept forward for the potential development of the courtyard area, which is the area between the community center and the library, as a possible centennial circle. The resolution before you this evening basically endorses that idea and also emphasizes that the necessary steps to take to accomplish that task would include the final approved design of the Centennial Circle, the raising of the necessary funds, and seeing the project through to completion. I also want to add that there have been a number of groups that have been contacted. I think it would also be important from the staff's perspective to include a representative from the Community Center Advisory Commission, the chair perhaps, or his or her designee, to also serve on that group. And with that, I would answer any questions that you might have. Mr. Miles, as you know, is also here this evening to answer any questions that you might have.
Good. Thank you very much. Let me first look for a motion to approve resolution 2011-07 relating to the Fountain Hills Centennial Circle Project.
So moved.
Got a first, any second? Second. First and second. Any speaker cards here?
No, sir.
All right. Thank you very much. Any questions related to the resolution? Thanks for explaining it, Mark. Councilmember Dickey?
No questions. I'm just, hope that you can support this project as we move forward with it. You know, we have about a year's worth of, activities coming, and this would just be a great addition, and I hope that the council can support it.
Great, thank you. And that's certainly, I think, an indication from the folks that are working on this project already and moving it forward. They want to make sure the town obviously is behind it and will make something happen to encourage the folks' continuing action and potential investment in making this circle happen. So we're very thankful for those efforts to lead towards that ultimate end and having a great centennial circle right here by the library and the community center. So I'm looking forward to it. Any other comments or questions? Councilmember Hanson.
Mayor, another positive thing that has come out as a result of all the discussion regarding the Centennial Circle and its location is the dialogue regarding the council vote in 1996 to name the community, what was referred to then as the community center courtyard, as the Cotillo Plaza. And I think it's really a positive thing. I know that Jerry's come up with an idea to, you know, maybe look at the entire area between the buildings as the Cotillo whatever, you know, with the circle being a component of that. So I hope that maybe in the future we can, you know, look at moving that forward as well, in addition to this.
Great, yep, definitely have heard that dialogue, so that's good. All right, we've got a motion and a second, no other discussion. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Mayor, 7-0.
Thank you. Item number 5, consideration of ordinance 11-07, amending the Town of Fountain Hills Town Code by adding provisions related to mail ballot elections. Welcome, Beth.
Mayor, council. At the council's September 14th work study, the council was informed that there had been an increase in election service fees by the county effective July 1st. And based on that new fee schedule, staff brought forward options as a way to offset those increased costs. Those two things that were brought forward was maybe a change to the fall election cycle and the all-mail ballot election. At that time, the council had indicated an interest in having this brought forward again for further discussion at a council meeting. These are the costs that became effective as of July 2nd, 2010. There was an increase from 73 cents to $1.37 per active registered voter. There was an increase from $1.72 to $2.12 for the early mail ballots. Some election facts that you should keep in mind as we talk about this a little bit more is that Maricopa County, our elections are held during the fall election cycle. In the sanitary district, they hold theirs during the fall, but in the odd years. And the school district, holds their elections in the fall in the even years. Bond elections are held in November in the fall cycle. Property tax elections are held in the spring cycle in May. If the Maricopa County has a ballot proposition, there is no way that we can hold an all-mail ballot, then that we would have to go along on the consolidated ballot. Election service costs. This slide is provided as a point of reference on all the costs. The town's 2010 election service costs with the county were about $23,000, and that was for the March primary. For the May general election, it was about $4,800. If you look at the numbers that are projected, this takes into account the registered voter data information that was available as of July 11th. An estimated ground election, town standalone election would cost about $39,500. An all-mail ballot election estimate would cost about $34,200. In the past, the difference between the cost of a town standalone ground election versus an all-mail ballot election was greater, and it favored the ground election. However, due to the implementation of the PEVL, as we call it, the Permanent Early Voting List in 2008, and the increasing number of early ballot requests by the voters, the all-mail ballot process now offers a small savings. It's about 13%. Included in the staff report were all the pros and cons and the direct impacts. I won't take time to read through all of those, and if you have questions, we can talk about them. And
Then we want to talk about the voter turnout. The average Fountain Hills voter turnout right now is about 32%. And this slide reviews information that was provided by municipalities who conduct all-mail ballot elections. It shows their before and it shows their after. Oops.
That's for voter turnout?
Yeah, let me just get to that slide.
I don't know if I can read it. Do you know what that number is? First, I know they're all different, but...
The column that has the black arrow, that is their turnout with the all-mail ballot. And the orange one is their turnout before. So there's increases. It looks like it goes to the double digits. Some reported single digits and they went up to the double digits.
Thanks.
The all-mail ballot process is conducted via the same process as early voting. The major difference is that voters do not have to indicate a request. This enables all eligible voters to receive and participate in the election process, as ballots would be mailed to all active registered voters within a specific period, either 26 or 15 days prior to the election, versus a ground election, which have ballots available as early voting sites are 26 days prior to the election. Jurisdictions do determine when the ballots are to be mailed in a mail ballot election. However, it would be staff's recommendation to mail the ballots out at the earliest period possible. That would be the 26 days, in order to allow voters with the most flexibility. The council may remember that the 26 days used to be 33 days, and that was shortened by legislation action. Town Hall would be the replacement ballot station, since everyone would be receiving a mail ballot, and we would offer a depository sealed ballot box for those individuals who did not want to mail them back. And of course, the voters could actually utilize one of the 3 Maricopa County Recorder's offices as well. They would also provide a replacement ballot. So to just kind of go through the process, Maricopa County elections, they would mail them out to all qualified electors who registered by the deadline. The electors would vote their mail ballot, return it either through the mail, or they would send it through the town hall in the secured ballot box drop-off. Those would be picked up on a regular basis. The ballots would be deposited at town hall, and they would be picked up, and then the county would process those ballots received by the deadline. This would also increase the time, the results that we would receive from the county, because there are no provisionals or conditional provisional ballots to be counted. Unofficial election results then would be released at 8 p.m., and as soon as any of those ballots that we had in our possession were transferred down there and counted, we would receive our official results. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Good, thank you. Do you recall any speaker cards on this item?
There were 3, so if I can run back up there, I'll take care of that. There were 3 cards: Sean Dow, Linda Bardot, and Peter Bardot.
All right, thank you. Sean. Mr. Dow.
Hello, Mayor and council members. Here's the problem that I have with going to an all-mail ballot election. It disenfranchises a large portion of our voters here in Fountain Hills, okay? Independents, well, let me explain first. The Republican Party is about to close their party. So independents will no longer be allowed to vote in the primaries, okay? So when they get mail ballots, you're going to be blocking out all those independents who haven't registered to vote by mail, as well as in the primaries. They won't be able to vote in this kind of special election when you hold these mail ballots only elections. Do you understand? Okay, not only will you be disenfranchising everybody who's not registered to vote by mail, so those people will not be able to vote in this new upcoming election that you're having here in May, okay, but you're also going to be blocking off all those independents that are now going to be shut out of the Republican Party primaries. We should never be limiting voters' ability to vote. By doing this, it looks like a reactionary thing that you're doing to prevent certain people from voting. We really should never have that. We should always be allowing people to vote as much as possible and whenever possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, when he's talking about independents, we don't have partisan elections.
Uh-oh. I think that we'll probably have a follow-up question for you
All right.
on that. Thank you. Mr. Bordeaux?
Mr. Mayor, council members, he's always a tough act to follow, I got to tell you. Yeah, so I just want to express my opinion and some of the observations that I had. I think limiting voters' methodology to cast their ballot and by mandating a mail-in only vote, I think is limiting our options. And again, you know, I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but, you know, the vote is the last great freedom that we have here. I don't know about the last great freedom, but it's certainly the best great freedom. It's the way that we participate and we own the government, right? When you limit our ability and our methodology and our modality of voting, you are in effect restricting our exercising our right to have a representative government. And I understand that there might be some cost savings around that conversation, but you know, you had a cost savings opportunity by including the question of the single trash hauler in the regular election in the fall. And the town is not without means. I mean, we have plus $20 million in investment funds. I don't know about town code, whether that money can actually be used, but you're talking about a 13% savings, which equates to about $5,000 thereabouts. I think relatively speaking, when you weigh the cost savings versus the restrictions on the modality of voting, my personal opinion is this would not be the right choice. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Ms. Bordeaux.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to note, if everyone saw the figures up there, I was noticing in the two columns where they were going over the savings of $5,000, what was unknown on the chart for the regular general election was how many people actually turn in their own ballots. By the way, I left my ballot at the chair. I meant to show it on the camera, but they're yellow, they're this big. You can get them at the library, you can get them at the community center, you can get them here at town hall, you can get them all over town, the post office, even the new DMV annex we have over at American Family Insurance by Bashas'. It's very easy to sign up for a mail-in ballot. What was missing on the chart was unknown, and that was the percentage of people that would actually already turn in their mail-in ballots. And having worked to help Congressman Schweikert become elected, I made a lot of those phone calls to a lot of those early ballot voters. And trust me when I tell you, there's a lot of people in Fountain Hills that are already using that. So I think you need to adjust for what that number might be, and a good figure of that would be to take a look at the electorate in the last election. In Fountain Hills, we have, 25,000 folks thereabouts. I think that's generous. 8,000 or so are registered to vote. Of them, 4,000 or so voted in the last election. So it would be fairly simple to crunch the numbers and see out of that 4,000 how many actually mailed on their ballot, so you can get a better idea of how much that might save. But I think you'll find that the number isn't quite as in favor of the mail-in ballot solely as well. And I'd like to reiterate what Mr. Dow and my husband said. I think we should not be limiting people's right and manner of voting. I personally would never use mail-in ballot. I like going to the polls. I like getting my sticker. I like thanking the poll workers for doing their civic duty and upholding our greatest right, and that is the right to vote. I think that's it. Thank you, Council.
Thank you. All right. Thank you very much. And yes, Councilor Borowski.
Bev, if you could speak to Ms. Bordeaux's comments, could you provide some statistics for the 2010 election?
Sure. In 2010, we had for the March election 16,075 people that were registered. Total ballots cast were 4,540. Of that, 857 were cast at the polls, and 3,683 were cast using early mail ballots. That was for March. For May, we had 15,511 registered voters. We had 7,686 ballots cast. 2,259 were cast at the polls, and we had 5,427 ballots cast using early mail ballots.
Councilmember Dickey.
I wanted to make a motion, please, to approve ordinance 11-07.
You got a motion? Do we have a second? Second. Thank you. Councilmember Hanson.
Deb, could you speak to the issue about restriction and the fact that some people would be disenfranchised and not receive ballots?
I don't quite understand that, because all registered voters have a deadline that they have to register by.
to receive a ballot or to vote in an election. And in an all-mail ballot, everyone who is registered would receive a ballot. It would be up to the voter whether or not to vote that ballot and mail it back in.
So if our registration was 14,000 plus or whatever, then each one of those people, regardless of registered party, would receive a ballot?
On a town election. If we're on a consolidated ballot with the state, then we would have to have a poll election, which means because the state is not, they don't have the authority to have a mail ballot. So it would still be a poll election with polling sites, and people would be going to the polls and have early ballots available to them.
In a singular election where it's just us?
Just
every voter would receive a ballot?
Correct.
Thank you.
Councilmember Dickey?
Mayor, thanks, and a couple of other things about voter turnout. Some of them are more modest, but if you look at like Litchfield Park, when they went to all mail-in, they had a voter turnout go from 5.5% to 49%. When Globe went to all mail-in, they went from 9% to 59%, and these two both have the same as we do, spring even year election. Prescott Valley went from 17% to 60%. And then the other thing is when people do the Pebbles here on regular elections, partisan, whatever, the turnout is much higher. So, and I think that's kind of in Bev's chart also, the percentage of voters who do early voting, the turnout is higher. So I don't think it disenfranchises. I think it's kind of on the side of getting more people involved. The other thing is to just speak to reactionary or anything like that. I think the first thing Bev said was September 14th, 2010, and we had like a work study session trying to figure out how to maybe have elections be not quite as expensive or how to make them easier. So we talked about changing the dates and all these other things. So this was just part of that conversation.
Thanks. Councilmember Elke?
If I may, Beth, in this upcoming May special election that we're having, if the council were to make the decision this evening to go to an all-mail ballot, how, if at all, would that affect those that are currently registered to vote as far as their ability to vote in this upcoming election?
Anyone who is registered by the deadline for that election would receive a ballot.
Is there any special registration that has to take place to be the mail ballot voter, so
No,
to speak?
it's no different than registering to vote, for any election. You would just make sure that you're registered, I believe it's 29 days prior to the election, and if you're on that list, then you would receive a ballot.
And how, and I believe this is one of the indirect impacts that you had noted, how will it affect future candidates for office in our town as far as the signatures are concerned?
When you have a greater voter turnout, you have a larger number of signature requirements on petitions.
Thank you.
Based on a percentage.
Thank you.
So the issue for if you're a registered voter, you get a ballot. For those items that are more like primary, non-town primary, where it's a Republican or a Democratic or independents perhaps now can vote for either party. I'm not sure exactly sure on that. Partisan election, this decision wouldn't affect those
No,
elections.
because they aren't allowed to hold mail ballot elections, so this would strictly be their election, and they would have polling sites, and we would be on their ballot.
The number of mail-in ballots over the last, from the last couple of years, has it been trending upwards?
We've been seeing an increase since the permanent early voting list came into play in 2008. More people are voting that way. Fewer people are going to the polls.
All right. So, and more people end up voting significantly.
That's the hope. If you get the ballot into their hands, that you hope that they return it.
And they don't have to mail it, they can bring it in.
They can bring it in.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? We got a motion second. Councilmember Hanson.
Deb, could you just briefly address security precautions? I know some people have the fear that an all-mail ballot election is just fraught with the possibility of some type of voter fraud.
If voters are familiar with the affidavit envelope that they receive if they request an early mail ballot, the voter is required to sign the inside of the envelope. Once that's returned, then the county actually compares that signature with their database of that voter information. So if it's not a match, they follow up with that voter.
Councilmember Dickey.
And another thing about that, because I used to worry about putting it in the mail, and what would happen to it is that you can check online, and it'll show that you voted, that they got it, which is, I don't think that they did that all the time, but now they do.
No, there's even a webcast now at the county, so you can watch how they count the ballots, if you're so inclined, 24/7 while there's early voting going on.
Councilmember Rowkey.
Is there any measure in place if I wanted to drop off my mail-in ballot? Has the town done anything in the past?
We would offer, as we did in the last election, one of those beautiful blue ballot boxes that we secure, and the county makes usually a weekly pickup of those ballots, and there's a chain of command. You know, once they take them out, it goes in an envelope, it's sealed, it's signed, their personnel transports it down to the county, and then they take care of processing it there.
So if I were concerned about mailing my ballot, as post office does tend to lose things from time to time or it's delayed, if I got my mail ballot, I could still drop it off in the voter box.
Absolutely.
Councilmember Hanson.
Mayor, just very quickly, I recall back in the 90s where we had examples of panic on Election Day. I recall a gentleman that had been put into the hospital that day, and he had not voted early, and he couldn't go to the polls. And, you know, we do have instances like that where, you know, you can't plan ahead for an illness or an accident or something that can leave people disenfranchised and not able to get to the polls. And I see that as a positive for an all-mail-in ballot.
And the fact that, I don't know how many more it'll escalate to over in the next election, but could be another 1,000 voters casting their ballots that wouldn't have potentially before. Just because the early ballot measure through the mail has been just growing leaps and bounds from one election to another. This would put those ballots in everybody's hands that's here, and I would expect the turn-in would really grow significantly with 16,000 current registered voters and 7,686 at the last rather large election. That one would not have been on an early ballot for the town. It would have been an early ballot through the state, so it wouldn't have been an early ballot unless you signed up, correct?
Correct. In a primary election, people do have the ability to request an early mail ballot, and that's 26 days out, so that they still have the ability to request one.
So that's important to note here. If we do move forward with this, they would still need to request if they're
On
not on
those
the
elections,
permanent
they
list.
would need to request, and that would not be an automatic one that would be dropped in the mail to them.
Okay. Very good. Any other comments? All right, we've got a motion and a second. All in favor of ordinance 11-07, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Mayor, 7-0.
Thank you very much. Item number 6, consideration of resolution 2011-05, ordering and calling a special bond election to be held in town and for the town of Fountain Hills, Arizona on November 8, 2011, to submit to the qualified electors thereof the question of authorizing the issuance and sale of $29,635,000 principal amount of general obligation bonds, project of 2012. Welcome, Paul.
Mayor and Council, it'll take me a second. My presentation is no longer on the desktop.
No problem.
Mayor, I can just, Council, give you a little bit of intro into this, and for those that are listening in and here today in our audience, this presentation is being provided as a culmination of efforts to bring to you a fiscal plan to address long-term our pavement and short-term our pavement management, and is in keeping with one of the initiatives brought forth by the strategic planning process, and also is in fulfillment of one of the goals that you all have designated for this fiscal year. And compliment Paul and Julie for the hard work they've put into this presentation. We'll probably, if you approve going forward with this initiative, will probably serve as the basis and a template for presentations that will be given of factual information about the initiative in the public.
Thank you.
All right. Mayor and council members. Maintaining Fountain Hills infrastructure, including its roadways, as Rick said, is a strategic initiative identified by the residents as well as a prominent council goal. I was tasked with reviewing the current maintenance practices of the roadways and what it would take to bring the roadways back into a sustainable, long-term maintenance program. Myself and the street superintendent, Ken Kurth, reviewed the existing practices. We looked at previous engineering consultant reports the town had done, spoke to pavement contractors, both local and valley-wide, to get their input on a program that we thought would be the best long-term solution for the town. The town's roadway system is divided into 7 pavement maintenance zones. There are 6 zones, and as shown on the map, and Zone 7 is the arterial roadways such as Shea, Palisades, Saguaro, and Fountain Hills Boulevards. Fountain Hills has 390 lane miles of roads, so that's 390 miles of roads. If you take Saguaro, if that's 4 lanes, then that's 1 mile is 4 miles of lane miles. There's approximately 3.5 million square yards of pavement in Fountain Hills that the town is responsible to maintain. A 2008 study done by Stantec Consultants in regards to pavement maintenance showed that the replacement value of all of the public roads in Fountain Hills would be $150 million. And that does not include any maintenance. That's just the cost if you wanted to replace the roads all at once, and that was back in 2008. Some different treatments that we do on the roads is crack seal. The first is crack seal in the upper left corner. They use compressed air to blow out the cracks, and then they put a sealant into the crack. That helps prevent from water getting into the cracks. When water gets into it, it migrates down into the subgrade, and it just compounds the cracking problem. We also have a surface seal. We have recently used a product called TRMSS, which is Tire Rubber Modified Surface Seal. That is basically a liquid asphalt with some emulsified tires that is laid over the surface of the road. And that refreshes or rejuvenates the oils in the roads. And this should be done every 3 to 4 years to keep the oils fresh. It keeps the roadways from drying out and cracking. In previous work studies, I gave the analogy of think of your pavement as a sponge. If it's damp and moist, it's pliable, it's workable. Once it dries out, it becomes brittle and cracks. And as soon as you lay pavement down, it begins to dry out and oxidize. And after about 3 to 4 years, you should reapply an oil treatment to keep those oils fresh. The next level of treatment is a slurry seal. Again, that is a liquid-like product, but it also has some aggregate or sand in it. It goes on at about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch. It provides a new wearing course for the road. Again, you typically only can do about 2 or 3 slurry seals to a road before you have to do a mill and overlay. And throughout town, you'll notice where the manholes seem a lot lower than the pavement. That's because the slurry seal has been built up over years. Finally, there's a mill and overlay, and that's where you take off the top 1.5 to 2 inches of asphalt and put down a new asphalt layer, assuming the subgrade's in good condition. Now, just for budgetary purposes and a frame of reference, the surface seal TRMSS is about 80 cents a square yard to do. The slurry seal is approximately $1.80 a square yard. Mill and overlay with a rubberized asphalt is approximately $13 a square yard. And if you had to do full reconstruction, then you're getting in the $20 to $25 a square yard range. So the surface seal and slurry seal are your preventive maintenance. So it's much cheaper to do preventive maintenance and let your roads get to the point where they need to be milled and overlaid. Typically, a road will last 25 to 30 years with proper maintenance, and the roads in Fountain Hills, many of them are at that age or past. Fountain Hills, the standard pavement maintenance we've been doing is treating one zone every year. So it takes us 7 years to get back to that zone before we do any maintenance to it. So what has happened over time is that road, after 3 to 4 years, begins to dry out and cracks, and then we come back 7 years and do some maintenance. So because of fiscal constraints, we haven't been able to do the proper maintenance. In Fountain Hills, we've typically only done the surface seal and the slurry seal. There's been no major mill and overlay projects, which are typically done after, most cities do them after about 20 to 25 years. So a lot of our roads are past that point. A good analogy is the brakes on your car. If the pads get worn on your brakes, you replace them. Well, we're past that point, and we're starting to grind the rotors now, so it's more expensive. We're trying to prevent some total failure and a much more costly repair. Some typical types of cracking. On Saguaro, we have alligator cracking that's occurring. That can be because just over time it's dried out. Could be because the pavement thickness isn't as thick to handle the loads of large vehicles, or there's some issues with the subgrade. On Palisades, in the downtown area, this has had multiple layers of slurry seal applied, and over time it begins to peel off. Residential streets, we have block cracking that's occurring, and on Sunridge, we have some reflective cracking. And in that scenario, when Sunridge was built, the subgrade was built with a cement-treated base, and so basically you have a cement, almost like a sidewalk with asphalt laid on top of it. So as that concrete underneath cracks, the crack comes up through the asphalt. So if you were to do a surface treatment on Sunridge, a few years later, you're going to have that same crack show up. So when we eventually do Sunridge, we'll have to address the subgrade. This is the aerial view taken in, I believe, the winter of 2009. That just shows the amount of cracking on Parkview and Verde River. So how do we get our pavement maintenance back on track? Ken Kurth and I looked at different scenarios of how many years would we can our roads last, and how many years do we need to get them back into shape. We looked at doing, a third of our roads, every 7 years, for 21 years to get them back, but that would cost approximately $38.5 million, and we thought that was just too much money. So what we settled on is doing mill and overlay of 20% of each zone when it's its scheduled time for maintenance. So we would mill and overlay 20% in zone, and my example here is zone 6. So we'll mill and overlay 20%, we'll do a slurry seal on the next worst 20%, and we'll do the TRMSS on what we believe is the best 60% of the roads. And then we'll do that every year. So when we get to the end, after 35 years, that last 20% to be milled and overlaid will be 50 to 60 years old. And we're hoping that if we start proper treatment now, we can limp along the best 20% out to a lifetime of 50 to 60 years. What we also plan on doing is using our capital projects fund to do the interim TRMS treatments every 3 to 4 years. That will keep that oils fresh in the road, because if we went and milled and overlaid the roads and didn't hit it for 7 years, we're just sending the roads down the same path. If we did nothing right now and continued on our same maintenance schedule, we would spend approximately $8 million over the next 10 years out of our capital projects fund. That would, without any new money going in, that would deplete our capital projects fund, and your roads would be at the same state, or if not worse, 10 years from now, because you're not getting the proper treatment. We would just be doing the surface seal or the slurry seal without any mill and overlay. So the proposal is that once we mill and overlay 20%, the first 20% of a maintenance zone, year 4 we would hit it with TRMSS, year 7 TRMSS with the bond funds, keep the oils fresh, and so on and so forth. And we can get a good 35 years out of that road and keep it in good repair. So this year, we plan on, the current maintenance cycle is to do zone 5. So if an election is held and it passes, we would propose to do Zone 6 next year, which is next in the maintenance cycle. We plan on addressing the arterial streets and the major collector streets first. So we would look at doing Golden Eagle, part of Golden Eagle, Boulder, Richwood, Sunridge, and Saguaro Boulevard. And I'll talk more about Saguaro in a few minutes. So the second year of the program, we would do Zone 1, which is the major arterials. We would plan to do Palisades in the downtown area and Fountain Hills Boulevard between Palisades and Saguaro. Year 3 of the program would go in Zone 1, where we would do El Pueblo, Grande, and Glenbrook, do the mill and overlay of those streets. And then the 4th year would be the downtown area, where we would do the Avenue of the Fountains, Parkview, El Lago, La Montana, and Verde River. And we just laid out the first 4 years of the plan because we know the conditions of the roads. When we go on to zone 3, 4, 5, 6, you know, the conditions might change 4 or 5 years from now. And then you can also see the yellow. Those are the areas where we're going to be doing the TRMSS treatments to keep the oils fresh. For Saguaro Boulevard, to completely mill and overlay that road between Shea and Fountain Hills Boulevard, there's 160,000 square yards of asphalt surface. The 2008 Stantec report identified 132,000 square yards that could be milled and overlaid, and 28,000 square yards which would need full depth replacement. So when we looked at the budget numbers, we come up with $4.8 million to do the basic project. That'll do the mill and overlay, the reconstruction. It'll do drainage improvements, which are shown in the blue areas at Palisades and along Desert Canyon Golf Course. We also need to do, when you do a mill and overlay, you also need to make sure all your ADA ramps are in compliance, so there may be some work there. We would want to replace any broken curb and gutter. We have to redo the striping, adjust manholes, and then also do some engineering design work. Additional work, we want to look at doing some improvements to the intersection of Avenue of the Fountains and Saguaro. We have a consultant that's ready to come on board. They will be willing to do a study. They'll look at what will happen with future traffic projections if we don't do any improvements at the intersection. If we keep a three-way stop and we shrink the intersection, they'll look at how traffic patterns would work with a traffic signal, and then they'll also look at options for a traffic circle and maybe some on-street parking on Saguaro. I included in my estimate the $1.75 million. That would be the worst case if we do the more expensive traffic circle project. We also included funding for some sidewalks and some crosswalks, which I'll show. This just shows the pavement condition at Saguaro and Kingstree. You can see where there has been a patch where it looks fairly new, and then the alligator cracking, you can see it's coming up in chunks. Some of the proposed crosswalk improvements, we have Saguaro and Paul Norton Parkway. Right now there's not a crosswalk, so we would like to include a crosswalk to get guests at the Holiday Inn across to the Plaza Fountain side. One of the other locations shown is Saguaro and La Montana. We'd like to put a crosswalk in to take advantage of the existing sidewalks. We also have areas on Saguaro where the sidewalks just dead end. The $750,000 we had budgeted for sidewalks does not complete all the gaps in the sidewalks, but it'll do a pretty good chunk of them. The 10-year bonding program comes out, when we take all that in, comes out to $29.6 million. You can see the first year would be the largest. That includes the Saguaro project along with Zone 6. And then as we go out through the 10 years, this gives us a good start of getting our roadways back into a proper maintenance cycle. At the end of 10 years, we'd have to take a look at where we're at and probably continue the program then. And I'll turn it over to Julie. She'll talk about the bond funds.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Paul. Mayors, Mayor, members of the council. The question is, why now? And as Paul said, that this has been a prominent goal of the council for fiscal year 10-11. It also was a strategic initiative identified by residents during the strategic planning process a couple of years ago. And this also helps us to focus on the downtown plan. And really, this is the lowest cost of borrowing in nearly 40 years. It's very economical to perform the major road projects now. And we're hoping to be able to take advantage of piggybacking on some of the other larger municipalities' bids that have been in this economic climate, as opposed to waiting for a couple of years when the economy is picked back up and it'll cost more. And we can pay now or we can pay later. We have been delaying and waiting for major road projects to happen over as long as I've been here, for 20 years, and we will never have enough funds to do what we need to do with the roads. The cost of maintaining approximately 390 lane miles is more than the town receives for road maintenance each year, including grants. And the HERF, the street fund, cannot support the annual debt service or the cost of pavement management. The current road maintenance plan is the most expensive way to manage the pavement. What we're doing right now is just putting Band-Aids on it, and it is really the most expensive way. We're delaying the inevitable. And we can save money in the long run by bringing our roads up to standards and then following the annual maintenance plan and maintain those roads for at least for up to 30 years. The current conditions are sound pavement management is not pretty. It's not something that people talk about or want to look for in their community. Very few people, notice the roads, but it does add to the quality of life for the residents, and it does add value for business and property owners. Maintaining our smoother and longer lasting roads, it's a long-term investment that requires capital expenditures. The current conditions, as Paul said, many roads are approaching 40 years old. Our annual maintenance has been limited to the bare minimum due to the evaporation of state road funds. Without reconstruction, the projected minimum maintenance cost for the next 5 years, coming out of the CIP fund, would be $3.7 million, or 8.2 over the next 10 years, which would pretty much deplete our capital projects fund. And again, deteriorating roads, they exacerbate the deteriorating property values. Where do our property tax dollars go? This is a chart that shows for every property owner in Fountain Hills where their property tax dollars go. And you can see that 46% of what you pay in property taxes goes to the school district. 39% goes to the county. The portion that goes to the town of Fountain Hills is 3%, and that's the voter-approved bonds for the mountains, for the library museum, and open space. Our town revenue sources, this is just a quick look at the revenue sources that the town receives each year. And then the general fund, we receive $12.6 million. The gasoline tax, or the HERF, is $1.3 million, and again is restricted to only be used for streets. Our special revenue, or grants, is about $6.5, and primarily with stimulus funding. The debt service, which is property tax, and again that can only be used to repay bonds. And then our capital projects is $10 million, and when it's gone, it's gone. Why $30 million, or 29.6? That's a huge amount. The town has never considered a bond amount that large before. But what it does for us is it allows for long-term planning, and good pavement management cannot be piecemealed. The bond issues will be broken up and going for $30 million as opposed to doing a $13 million bond and then a $6 million bond. What the objective is to make the annual debt payment be level for the taxpayer. So in other words, when in the first few years with the first bond issue, and each of these bond issues have to go back to the council. Authorizing the $30 million is just one piece of it. The council then has to authorize the first issuance of the bonds, which is about $13 million. The council then has to authorize the construction project. But the goal would be to sell the bonds in such a way, and knowing that we have authorization for up to $30 million, we can schedule out the annual debt payments, which equals the property tax, so that they remain level to the taxpayer. If we did it in $13 million and then we went back to the voters with another election for the next piece of it, we would have a debt payment that was $500,000, And then when the next issue came on, it would be another $300,000, which would be $800,000 a year. This way, we want to have a debt payment of $800,000, and then it drops down to $500. The other one comes on for $300, and it stays at $800. And I'm just using those numbers. But that would then, what that means is the property tax that people pay would remain level. They wouldn't have spikes up and down as bonds were paid each year. So that's the reason why $29 million. The current funding, the funds that we have available for roads is we have our HERF, our gasoline taxes, which is $1.3 million each year, and that covers all street maintenance. It covers signage, it covers traffic signals, medians, and it's just not enough to reconstruct. And as Paul said, the cost to mill and overlay is 7 times more than slurry seal coating. When the town incorporated, there were some road districts that existed, and the road districts, that's how they did their roads, is they issued bonds, and the property owners paid those bonds up until 1998, and then those bonds taxes were gone off the property tax bill. And why propose bonds? The theory with bonds is community equity. Everyone uses roads, and everyone pays a little bit on their property tax. And if the roads last 30 years, then everybody pays for them, as opposed to having current residents have to pay the full amount for the benefit of future residents. And again, due to the lack of funding, property street maintenance has been deferred for several years. And the cost of the projects right now is very favorable. The cost of borrowing is very favorable, hopefully for a little while longer. Further delays will only increase the scope of it and the cost of maintenance. And as infrastructure deteriorates, so do property values. The recommendation would be for general obligation bonds, which always have to be approved by voters. They would be repaid through ad valorem or property taxes. The bonds are sold after the project is bid, meaning we would go for, if the voters approve it, the first would be that Zone 6 that Paul talked about. We would go to sell bonds only in that amount, which would be about $7 million or $13 million, I think, for the first phase. That, again, would have to go to the council for approval. The council would approve that authorization, the bonds would be sold, and those projects would be done. Then the next phase, we'd come back to the council for the next phase of $4 million. So at each step of the way, the council would approve it, and those funds, we can't exceed the authorization. So if $13 million is what's authorized, we can't exceed any more than that. And it's really the most efficient way to pay for infrastructure that all residents benefit from. Again, general obligation bonds must be approved by voters. Town council has to authorize each issue, and the total amount can't exceed the amount that the voters authorized and can only be used for pavement management program. An estimate of what the impact on the property tax payers, property tax bills would be on a $100,000 residence. It would be $2.75 a month. And these are estimates because there's a lot of variables that can change between now and the time that these bonds would be sold, which isn't for another year. That's about $33 a year on a $100,000 home. On a $350,000 home, it's $9.63 a month, or $115.50 a year. On a $500,000 home, it's $13.75 a month, or $165 a year. And on the commercial, which the commercial property is assessed at a much higher rate by the county, so they're assessed at 24%, and so their tax bill would be a little bit more. On $100,000 commercial, it would be $110. Again, this is based on a flat level. We did the most conservative flat level of assessed valuations, meaning that the property values do not go up at all for the next 15 years. And we actually used next year's property valuations, which are going to be lower than they are right now. And we assumed a 15-year repayment schedule, and the average tax rate increase is 33 to 42 cents. And again, this chart shows the tax impact to the residents. Right now, you can see on the left, that's what our property tax bill has been. It's been going down, 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 and then it's going to go away in 2019. But if the new ones come on, they wouldn't come on until 2013. The bonds would be sold after the election. If the voters approve it, it would be sold in 2012. It would not go on the property tax bills until September of 2012. And so the goal would be to keep those the tax level back to where it was in 2001. So we wouldn't have those spikes up and down if we had
different elections at different times.
Julie, on that one, what's this showing? Specifically, what is it showing? It's got a dollar amount on the side on the left?
Correct, Mayor. What this is showing is if you look at the bar all the way to the left is 57 cents per 100 of assessed valuation that Fountain Hills residents pay to the town of Fountain Hills for bonds that were issued for the mountain bonds, the library museum. Those are the general obligation bonds. You can
I want to clarify, because it's not a tripling of their property taxes like this looks like.
no.
This is since it's such a small amount, this 3% of their total tax bill today going to the town.
Correct.
This is based on that, this is that 3% increasing. That's what,
Right.
I just want to make sure we're clear on that.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. In 2001, it was about 57 cents per 100. It's now 16 cents is what is on the property tax bill.
Generally, if there's a way to do that, do you know what they are paying overall, property tax-wise, what the rate is?
Including the school and all of that, it's about $10.
Okay.
$9 or $10.
So this is 57 cents of that $10.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Timetable, calling the election, and hopefully this evening. We would start then with community outreach from February up until the election, try to give the public as much information as we could, make ourselves available to answer any questions, make sure that they understood what we were doing. The date of the election would be November 2011. The first bond sale would not be till probably February of 2012. Construction would start in March 2012. The first levy would be in August of 2012, and on the property tax bills in September of 2012. The second bond sale would be about July of 2014, and the third bond sale would be about July of 2017. With that, both Paul and I are here and happy to answer any questions the council may have.
All right, thanks, Paul and Julie. Any speaker cards on this item?
Yes, Mayor, one card, Sean Dow.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Dow.
Hey, Mayor, council members. I have some questions that I had about this bond issue, so I started doing some research. Came to find out what a bond is. A bond is a credit line. It's a line of credit that you have to pay back with interest. So you don't want to raise a tax for this. You want to raise a tax with interest at the tune of $30 million. So I started pulling all the other towns and cities around Arizona to find out how much they paid back on their bonds. Very few towns have bonds this size, but the ones that I did find, they end up paying back at least double. So we're not talking about a $30 million bond, we're talking about a $60 million bond. And already you're planning on renewing it. Now what it looks like is every now and then you find a city where they have had a bond where they've already renewed it, and again, and again, and again. There's one bond in Glendale where they've had to pay back 7 times the amount of the bond that they requested. I appreciate you allowing the voters to have their say-so in it, but what I'm curious about is what is your backup plan? Do you have we have a great streets department. They've been managing our roads for 40 years, and we haven't had too many problems with them. They manage it great. We pay a lot of our taxes to cover that. What are you going to do if you get turned down for this $30 million / $60 million plus when you renew it again even more? What is the plan if the voters say no? Thank you.
Thank you. Is that it?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. All right, folks, we'll have a little discussion here. Any initial questions before we get a motion? Councilmember Contino.
Yes, I have one for, for Paul. You talked about the crosswalks, and I appreciate what you're doing on the 2 streets. The one I was concerned about, it hasn't been in there since the beginning, is Parkview and Saguaro. There is no crosswalk there. And I was just wondering if you thought about that or if there's a way to work that in.
Mayor Shalom, Councilmember Contino, what we're showing up there right now is just a concept. We're going to have the engineering firm that would eventually be hired to look at Saguaro, and they would come up with a plan for which crosswalks they would propose, and they would go over that with myself and the town engineer and the street superintendent. So we would probably bring that back before you at a work study session to show you what sidewalks, what crosswalks we would plan to do on Saguaro.
Okay.
So nothing is set right now.
Okay. Do you have a cost on what your engineer is going to cost us? Consultant?
Typically, the engineering consultant on a project of Saguaro, if you're looking at the $7 million range, if it was a brand-new road, full reconstruction, it would probably be in the 5 to 6% range. Mill and overlay it's a lot less design work. The major design work on Saguaro will be whatever we decide to do at the intersection with Avenue of the Fountains. You'll have some significant design work at Palisades for the drainage improvements and the other drainage improvements, the crosswalks, the sidewalks. They'll have to go out and survey all the manholes, the valve covers, just so we make sure we don't cover them up. We want to work with the sanitary district and the water company on their future projects or what they might want to repair before we get in there. So if I had to guess, I put in here about 10% to cover any engineering costs and construction management costs. We would probably want to look at hiring an outside construction management firm because right now we only have one engineering inspector, and this one project would take up all his time and not allow him to do other stuff. So for budgetary purposes, I have about 10% in that $7.5 million number.
And where would that money be coming from?
That would be from bonds.
Okay. Thank you.
And with that, I think, I may have missed it, I thought Councilor Mercantino mentioned, or you mentioned first a consultant?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what it was, consulting fee? And then I heard you talk about engineering work. Is it?
Correct.
Is that one and the same? It's an engineering work, it's consulting?
Mayor Shalom, the engineer that we have ready for a study is already money that's programmed out of the Downtown Improvement Fund, and it's a project in the capital improvement program to specifically look at Saguaro and Avenue of the Fountains. The budget right now, I believe, has $30,000 for a study. Spoke to the engineer. I've worked with them before. The proposal they gave us is under $20,000. Again, it's a study only. They're going to come out and they're going to do traffic counts. They're going to look at turning movements, how many large trucks are using that intersection if they're turning and coming up the avenue, going straight through. They're going to look at future traffic volumes 20, 30 years out to what that ultimately is going to be like. They'll do a study that will look at if we do nothing and leave it as it's configured today, if they want to do a three-way stop and shrink the intersection, because one of the major problems with that intersection is it's so wide. They'll look at a traffic signal, what that would look like, what that would do to traffic patterns, and then they'll also look at some different options for a traffic circle and what traffic patterns would look like on that as well. So it's a study only. We would bring it back to you at a work study session where we'd look for your approval on which way you would want to go with a full engineering design, which would be separate. Hopefully that answers your question.
Councilmember Cantino?
Thank you, Mayor. The traffic counts and the things you do of how many trucks, semis, and et cetera, there's times during the week that I'm on the roads between 5 and 6 in the morning here. I see a lot of semis. So how are we going to know what the traffic counts are going to be if they don't get up before dawn?
Mayor Shalom, Councilmember Cantino, the plan, when I spoke to the engineering firm, the plan is to have them out there very early because I get to work before 7 and I see the postal office semis going down the road. I see you driving down the road. And then they'll also probably do a few days during the week and a few days during the weekend as well to pick up the different traffic patterns.
Okay, thank you.
Good, and I was going to mention this first. There's a citizen mentioned some questions. I don't know if you want to speak to some of the thoughts there related to what other towns do, backup plans, that sort of thing.
Mayor Shalom, just to give you some of my experience coming from the town of Gilbert, in 2006 we did a road bond election of approximately $60 million, and then in 2007 we did another road bond election of approximately $170 million. And Gilbert is still working through that plan. That's going to take them 10 years to get through that plan to widen their roads. The backup plan, if it goes to election and it's not approved by voters, we would have to keep doing what we're doing now. and that would start to deplete the capital projects fund, which would take away from being able to do other infrastructure projects. The HERF funds that we get are only enough to cover the streets department, their general maintenance of traffic signals, street sweeping and whatnot. Right now, we pay for the annual maintenance program 100% out of the CIP fund.
Well, what I heard, or what I'm assuming was more the issue is, this is a loan. This is borrowing money, obviously. As Julie pointed out, the rates are, the lowest they've been. But it is still having to pay back interest on the dollars. From the work study, I recall you bringing up the fact that if you wait longer, the cost is higher, not just because things cost more in the future, but because of the degradation of the roads and the amount of work that would be required at that time. And obviously, some of these roads are now 40 years old, and at some point, all roads need to be, I assume, mill and overlaid. So some are at that point just because of the age. But if you do just continue going along the route that we've been doing, I know in the work study you talked about that costing us a lot more in the end, the kind of pay me now or pay me more later. Can you explain that?
Correct, Mayor Shlum, council members. You're absolutely correct. If we kept down the same path and just did the minor surface treatments and didn't do any mill and overlay, we would be at the same point 10 years from now. The roads would continue to degrade, and instead of doing 20% a year of mill and overlay, we might have to do 25% or 30%, because now when you get to the end, instead of your roads being 50 to 60 years old, you're looking at 60 to 70 years old. If that answers your question.
It did, thanks. Councilmember Dickey.
Yeah, thanks. Paul, I have a couple questions. When we talk about property assessment, we talk about it in the for the whole town, for the whole municipality. If we have more houses built and the property values are going up, would that alter the rate for each house so that it might be less if there's more houses?
Mayor Shlum, members of the council, yes. That as you add more properties or more property valuation, then the tax rate does go down, because you take your annual debt service, which again we're trying to keep level across for however many years, whether it's 15 or 20, but the more valuation you have to divide that same number into, the rate does go down. But for the purposes of this, we just assumed no increase in valuation, so this is the worst case scenario. But realistically, it's likely that the rate would go down.
Mayor and Julie, thank you. I mention that because I think a lot of people think when their property when their property value goes up, it might automatically mean that the tax would go up. But if at the same time that's happening to the whole town or more houses are being built, the amount that we're bonding for hasn't changed, so it actually could go lower. And I know that you said, Julie, that this is a good time for the interest rates. But if for some reason they got a lot better, for some, I don't know why, but would we be able to refinance?
Mayor Shlum, members of the council, we could, depending on the terms of the bonds. You know, some of them are not callable. The longer you have a period where you're not able to call them back in to refinance them, the better interest rate you get.
Okay.
If we want to have a shorter period, then we're going to pay a little bit higher interest.
And there's just one more thing. And then when we're supposed to call for, say, the second part of it, if we haven't gotten there yet, or if for some reason the cost had come in lower, just having an authorization for $29 million doesn't mean we have to do that, right? And does that have a time limit to it?
Mayor Shlum, members of the council, you are correct. If having the authorization does not mean that we have to spend it. There is a time limit, and I talked to our financial advisor today, and I'm not sure if Andrew knows what the answer is. Depending on, according to our financial advisor now, school districts have a 10-year time limit where they have to use up their authorization. Cities and towns, depending on which firm you talk to, either don't or have a 20-year, is it? I think one of the more conservative law firms, going unnamed, is I think 20 years.
I'll name them. The conservative law firm, Mr. Bond Counsel, is my firm. And I believe that 20 years, it can go as much as 40 in terms of the authorization in the bond issue, but our financial policies have it at 20 years as well. 15 years for the target, 20 years as the outside maximum. And without knowing for certain what kind of delay you're talking about or how long out. And I think we'd rather leave that kind of a detailed question to bond counsel to answer.
And Mayor Andrew, the reason I ask that is because if we don't move as quickly, or if the cost is really a lot lower than we expect, we could end up with having some that we don't have to. And just to bring another worry to rest maybe would be that even if we did, we could not spend it on anything else. So if we no longer had a need in the road area, then it's not like we would just go ahead and call for the bond and use it for something else.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Dickey, that's correct. The only things that you're allowed to use it for are in the actual ballot question that's attached to the resolution. Now, if you find yourself with borrowed money that's in excess of what you need for the projects, you have a number of options at that point, and including what Paul has spoken about in terms of the percentage that you do in each zone. You may be able to get ahead of the program or get closer to the ideal maintenance schedule. This is a backed off, conservative, trying to not borrow too much version. If you get more bang for your buck, as we've seen in some of the issuances lately, especially with the contract prices in the past few years, you might get more in that program, but you're still stuck in that program. The funds can't go anywhere else.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks, Vice Mayor Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. This question's for Paul. Paul, just the opposite as Councilmember Dickey was asking, have you allowed for inflationary pricing increases over the years?
Mayor Shlum, Vice Mayor Brown, yes, my projections include a 3% inflation factor each year.
And I've studied your plan carefully, and your long-term plan is not as aggressive as I would like to see it, but it is certainly a plan that I think is doable, and it's nice for the town to have a plan. I think this is the first time that the town has actually had a long-term plan set before us, and I have to say that it looks good to me. And as far as the pay now, pay later, I think we are already paying later, and if we don't pay later now, later is going to be extremely expensive. And the last question I have is, and you've touched on this, the HERF fund, we're currently at $1.3 million. What's the chances of that going away, number one? And number two, will we continue to use it strictly for maintenance, such as signage, street sweeping, et cetera, et cetera?
Okay. I can't talk to you about it going away, but you're correct. It is only used for street maintenance. Unfortunately, right now, it's not enough to cover the annual maintenance program. It's only enough to cover the day-to-day operation of the streets department, the salaries, the street sweeping, the minor repairs they do.
Thank you.
Councilmember Hanson.
As Julie had mentioned, it's been a tradition in Fountain Hills through the 90s that it seemed like street maintenance was always kind of put on the chopping block and deferred to other departments and on other priorities. So that's kind of what's gotten us here today. But, we do look at that number, and that's a really big chunk to swallow. And I'm just wondering if there's any guarantee to the voters that they're going to look at this ballot and the question and vote on it. Are they assured that it's broken down into those four areas of the 14, 6, 6, and 4, I believe, in the fourth quarter of it, and so that they know that, okay, this is the plan. We're voting for 29, but we have the guarantee that for this time period, it's just going to be 14, and then the next time period, it's just 6, so that they know for sure that this is what they're getting and voting for.
Mayor, Councilmember Hanson, that is ultimately up to the town council, because when we want to do as Julie said, when we want to go out for the actual sale of the bonds, it needs to come before council to get the approval. So we need to come back, we need to get the approval from the voters for the full $29 million, but we need to come back to council to get approval to actually sell the 13 the first time. Then 4 years later, we'll come back for request council's approval to sell the next 6, and then the next 6 and the 4.
And then, Mayor, just one more thing. Was any consideration given in the 2012, the Zone 6 and Saguaro Boulevard for that first big project to go forward, concentrating more on the commercial area, on the streets that get traveled a lot more heavily and on a daily basis, you know, like Palisades and Saguaro?
Mayor Slum, Councilmember Hanson, we did look at that. Unfortunately, we want to keep it in the same, in the same cycle. So if we skip Zone 6 and we use the money for other areas, then we're really getting out of whack and we're not getting into a good cycle. So we might not get back to, you know, Zone 6 for a while. So instead of that going 7 years, it could be going 8 or 9 or 10 years. But we are concentrating the program in each zone on the arterials and the collector streets. So the more heavily traveled streets are the ones we're hitting first in each zone with the mill and overlay.
I'm just wondering if it would help with the voters on, you know, the ones that drive Palisades every day, and, you know, if that particular segment was, you know, bumped up into that first initial phase. I don't know.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Elke.
Thank you. I just want to just kind of step back just a little bit. As I understand, the HERF fund, the 1.3 million that we receive, is basically what is used by the streets for their annual budget. Is that correct?
Correct.
Is that is that what the budget is for the streets each year, or is it more than that?
Mayor Shlum, Councilmember Elke, I believe it's been about that. Plus, like when we have a project going on, like the sanitary district project, when somebody cuts through our pavement, they have to pay in lieu fees to help us basically go back and resurface the roads in the future. So we add that into our funds as well.
And then any additional road maintenance that needs to be done, as I believe Julie or Ms. Getty had stated earlier, has been coming historically from the Capital Improvement Project Fund. Is that correct?
Correct.
Can you explain where the monies come from that go into the CIP fund? Or perhaps, Julie?
Mayor Schlaw, members of the council, money that goes into the CIP fund currently is just first sales tax from construction, which has dropped off considerably. We have a fund in there, balance in there of about $10 million from several years ago when construction was really going well, in addition to any surplus general fund revenues. So currently there's $10 million in there, which has been a result of the past several years. But again, we don't anticipate any construction sales tax revenue to go in there or any surplus general fund revenues for at least the foreseeable future of the next 4 or 5 years.
Is it foreseeable in the future that there's going to be, well, from what I can see anyway, that the CIP funds, that's going to just continue to dwindle year after year? We may see, of course, a spike with any type of new construction, but over time, that CIP fund is going to be very, very small as far as new construction, and then any excess of general fund revenues. Is that correct?
Mayor, some members of council, Councilmember Tate, that's correct.
And then so what the council at that particular time would need to do is establish, wouldn't be a fund, but any road maintenance, as we've been discussing, would have to come out of the general fund, plus the HERF, of course. If there's no more CIP, well, it would be a council's decision, but if there's no CIP funds, which we've been paying it from, it would have to come from somewhere else.
That's correct.
Which could be the general fund.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Mayor, just a couple more things, if I may. Paul, if I could, or maybe this may be more for Julie. So assume for the sake of argument, all of our streets are new, everything's brand new. What would the annual budgeted cost be to maintain our streets in an appropriate cycle, perhaps similar to what you're discussing here?
If all our streets were brand new today, the maintenance we would do would be what I had on that larger circular life cycle chart. It would not be unsimilar to what we do now, probably about anywhere $750,000 to $1 million a year, depending on the zone, because some are twice the size of the others. But that's assuming that the roads were brand new and in perfect condition.
Okay. Now, so once the roads, after this cycle, presuming the voters approve this particular this bond, once the roads are back, then can we expect a of course, there's going to be inflation and whatnot 10 years from now. But can we expect a stable annual amount once these roads are up and where they should be?
Mayor Schlum, Councilmember Elke, remember we're only mill and overlaying 20% of each zone every year. So it will take 5 times in each zone to get all the roads milled and overlaid. So if you're doing that once every 7 years and you need to do it 5 times, it's going to take 35 years before you get all the roads redone. And when you do the last 20%, that road's going to be the 50 to 60 years old, and the one you do, let's say you do Zone 6 next year, that's going to be almost 30 years old. So it's a cycle. You have to plan a long-term maintenance program to keep the roads in good condition. Otherwise, they're going to deteriorate, and you know, it's pay me now or pay me more later.
One last question, Mayor. It's going to be for Julie. Julie, if we borrow $29.6 million, can you project what that repayment's going to be?
I'm sorry.
With the interest, if I understand we're not going to borrow it all at one time with the bond. If we do I think it was $13 million would be the first phase was projected or proposed, I should say. But you may have heard Mr. Dow make a comment to the effect that if we borrow 29.6, we're going to be repaying double that. And I think there was a comment also that another community paid triple that. Can you address that a little bit or provide some information?
Yeah, Mayor Slum, Councilmember Tate, Mr. Dow is correct. There is an interest charge. Borrow $29 million, it's going to cost us more than $29 million. What I don't have in front of me is because we're going to borrow it in separate sections, the $13 million, depending on what the interest rate is, what is it going to cost us over 15 years or 20 years, depending on our repayment schedule. But definitely there's an interest charge like there is on a mortgage or anything else. So he is correct. It's going to cost us more than $29 million, but that is the nature of bonds. Does that answer your question?
Yes, in part, but there's no way for you to specifically project or...
I'm sorry, I didn't bring the debt schedule. We do have the debt schedules, and I'm happy to provide that information to the council on Monday, but I didn't bring it with me. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
And tell you how much those bonds are going to cost.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember
Dickey. Mayor, can her funds be used for landscaping that's blocking, you know, the views or the roads? Like if it's a safety issue, can her funds be used for that?
Mayor Slum, Councilmember Dickey, her funds can be used for anything that is considered street or road maintenance, which includes right-of-way, line-of-sight issues, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for a good presentation. I think it was also mentioned the street department does do a great job. We got to give them the tools to make sure we can have the roads not fall into decline, similar to many parts of Saguaro Boulevard, which we've been putting off. And Councilmember Hanson brought up a good point about Saguaro and Palisades. When would those be done or addressed? And Saguaro in particular, you know, the folks that perhaps live over by Palisades and go out Shea Boulevard to or from the community may not be as familiar with Saguaro Boulevard, but obviously that's at or near the top of the list for quick attention. But Palisades is another one. Can you speak to the timing on those two?
Mayor Slum, council members, Saguaro we would look at doing right away. And we do Zone 6 in the first year and try to do Saguaro in the first year as well. Zone 7 is the major arterials. And remember, we only budgeted enough to do 20% of Zone 7. So that 20% is Palisades from Saguaro to Fountain Hills Boulevard, and then Fountain Hills Boulevard from Palisades to Saguaro. So that's the 20% that would get the mill and overlay. The other arterials in Zone 7, the rest of Palisades and Fountain Hills Boulevard and Shea, would either get a slurry seal or a TRMSS treatment.
All right, so all of Saguaro, Palisades to Fountain Hills Boulevard between
in the
Saguaro
second year.
And okay, so
And-
2012 and 13, those areas will be.
Correct. One thing I'd like to point out is, speaking with the sanitary district, whenever the Elman property develops, they need to put a sewer line in from the wastewater treatment plant on Saguaro and Pepperwood, up to their property. So if we probably don't want to do Saguaro from the sanitary district's treatment plant to Fountain Hills Boulevard right away, because the last thing we want to do is build a new road and have somebody come in a year or two later and cut it.
So from Fountain Hills Boulevard on Saguaro, quarter mile back to Pepperwood, that section.
We'd have to coordinate and look at timing. Also, the water company has indicated that a new water line would need to go in with the Elman project on Fountain Hills Boulevard from Palisades to the north. So we may not look at doing that. If that doesn't go, we would probably look at taking the money, we would mill and overlay that small section of Fountain Hills Boulevard and probably do Shea from Palisades to the west, to the Scottsdale border, because that's a fairly old section of road as well.
Okay. All right, thank you. And any other questions, comments? I know we had a work study. We learned more, or we really were delivered the significant news through a great report that Paul put together, and welcome your talents to our community. Once again, Paul, and thank you for being delivering us the more or less bad news, but getting us on the schedule. Appreciate it. Councilmember Hanson.
Paul and Julie, is there a plan to take your show on the road to our various groups in town, and Rotary, Kiwanis, anybody that will listen?
Mayor, Councilmember Hanson, absolutely. That's the plan. Once the council approves putting to the voters, our plan is to get out and on the street and inform as many people as we can, be open to ask any questions, and make the public aware of what we're trying to do, and hopefully give them some comfort that that it is a good plan and that we're trying to do the best that we can. So absolutely.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge will be to manage that $29 million.
It's a big number.
Yep. Yeah, very important. Good, well, thank you. And I know we've got some language here specific to a motion. Anyone looking to make a motion here? Move that up. Councilmember Dickey.
Move to approve Resolution 2011-05, ordering and calling a special bond election to be held in and for the town of Fountain Hills, Arizona on November 8th, 2011, to submit to the qualified electors thereof the question of authorizing the issuance and sale of $29,635,000 principal amount of general obligation bonds, project of 2012.
Very good. Got a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
All right, second. Any other discussion? Any other questions? All right, all in favor of the motion, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Mayor, 7-0.
All right, thank you very much. Next item, consideration of Resolution 2011-06, approving an intergovernmental agreement with the Fountain Hills Sanitary District relating to GIS mapping and CAD services. Rick?
Thank you, Mayor. Some time ago, we introduced the concept to you of joining in a collaborative effort with the sanitary district, try to utilize resources more efficiently between the two entities, and developed a proposal to allow the sanitary district to use GIS and CAD services for the town and reimburse the town for that. This will save taxpayer money, of course, on the part of the sanitary district, and also makes more efficient use of our personnel here. This labor will be primarily applied to updating the sewer atlas. So with that, I encourage you to give consideration to this IGA.
All right, thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor.
Oh, and yes, sir.
One quick technical note on the IGA, the initial term on the current version in your package is through June 30 of 2011. That needs to be changed to 2012. So the first term will actually be a little bit longer than a year.
I understand, thank you. Any speaker cards on this item?
No, Mayor.
All right, thank you very much. Can we get a motion to approve Resolution 2011-06?
So moved. Second.
All right, thank you. Any questions or discussion on this item? I know we talked about it a couple meetings back. Now it's here before us. Sounds like good leveraging, collaborative approach to utilizing limited resources and town staff skills across another organization in our community that benefits us. So, good job. Good job coming up with this, and reminds me a little bit of some of the benefits I'm sure will be coming out of our collaboration summit that Tate put together. It was terrific. So, we'll need more of this, leveraging of each other's strengths and resources around our community and region. So, I'm looking forward to Resolution 2011-06 passing with the correction that Mr. McGuire mentioned. Councilmember Hanson.
Thank you. I was just curious if the district has acted on this yet?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Hanson, they acted on a version somewhat similar to this a while back. We sent over a letter agreement. It came back as an already approved IGA. I've talked with their legal counsel about the version that you have here tonight, and he feels comfortable that they can execute this version without having to go back to their board.
So their legal has approved it? Yes. Okay, thank you.
And the resolution can be adopted just as is, because our resolution form approves substantially the form attached, so we can make that administrative correction to the term without adding it to your motion.
Okay, thank you. All right, got a motion second. No more questions or discussion. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Mayor, 7-0.
Thank you. Item 8, discussion of possible direction of staff relating to the appointment of town staff to work to a work group in cooperation with the Fountain Hills Sanitary District to develop Fountain Lake quality initiatives. Rick.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Along the lines of the Sanitary District, in December, they were kind enough to share with us a report on water quality of the fountain and Fountain Lake. In acting on this, we are here to propose to you that in congruent with their recommendations that we appoint or that I can designate 3 individuals from our staff to work with their staff to formulate some initiatives, after which you can act upon those, implement those. The mayor had responded to an inquiry by the sanitary board relative to what this governing body had planned to do, and the only initiative really we have considered thus far is the appointment of this group, and then defining for them, you would define for them a scope of what to look at and what kind of initiatives you would expect to be brought back to you. The individuals that I would propose sending forward would be Julie Getty to provide some guidance with regard to finances, also Mark Mayer, our Community Services Director, and Paul Mood, our Development Services Director. So with that proposal, I'll look for any guidance, advice, and you can give to us relative to this initiative.
Thank you. Any speaker cards on this item?
No, sir.
All right, thanks. And if we don't have a motion, we can have discussion and look for a motion on this item. I don't think we have language for this. Do we need a motion this time for staff direction?
Mr. Mayor, if you want to formalize the staff direction to have the manager do it, you can do it by simple motion and voice vote.
So in favor of what he had stated, what town manager presented for us this evening. That's all I'll look for a motion on.
Mayor?
Councilman Hanson.
First, it's my understanding that they have on their side for the committee a couple of directors that have been appointed to this, and I think they did that as as a way to show their commitment to this process going forward. Would it behoove us to see if there would be a council member or two to serve as well, since they have directors on the committee along with their staff?
A couple thoughts on that. Maybe I'll look for Rick. You want to give some feedback on council members versus staff, and if it's in essence the equivalent of a council member, is that what you're saying, from the sanitary district? The directors or the council members in essence,
right,
of their
staff plus council people.
Okay.
Mayor and Council, we're completely flexible in the composition that you would like to put together for this study group. Our thoughts were that this group would delve into some of the technical possibilities associated with this and then bring back both governing boards' initiatives that could then be acted upon. I have no information relative to the composition of their delegation, so given that reality that Councilmember Hanson shared with us, it probably would be appropriate to have a counterpart on the study group. But if they're gonna have all staff, then maybe we ought to remain technical on our side too. So, we're flexible and we'll take instruction from you.
Maybe just looking for conformity.
Thank you for mentioning that. Andrew, how about, the makeup of that work group? Any restrictions, concerns we need to be, related to items that might cost money or require additional resources?
Well, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, as you know, anytime we designate an official committee or sub-working group of this body, and you would by a motion and vote do that, that contains council members, we always have to consider the open meeting possibility that we're going to have. Remember that it doesn't take a quorum of that, it doesn't take a quorum of the council on that body in order to make it a subcommittee that has to follow the open meeting law, including posting agendas and taking meeting minutes. It can be a subcommittee without doing that. So I don't know if, without having talked to Bill Sullivan about it, I don't know if they've analyzed that issue from the other side of this discussion as well, if they've come to a conclusion that it's not a subcommittee. I'd certainly love to chat with them about it. But anytime we have council members appointed as an official subcommittee, as part of an official subcommittee, we always have concerns about that.
Even if they're not making decisions?
Well, subcommittees and advisory committees don't typically make decisions, they make recommendations. And the statute is very, very broad in terms of subcommittee and advisory committee. It encompasses pretty much anyone that you all officially designate. So if it's a staff-only group, we have a lot less concern that there's any kind of a open meeting issue. It's just that the statute's drafted very broadly, and the current group that enforces it is very zealous about that.
Councilmember Hanson.
Mayor, maybe this would, since it's considered a study group, maybe it would be more like our Centennial Committee that you're sick, you have a cold. Poor thing. Anyway, the Councilwoman, Ginny and I both serve on, so I would see it more in that light, and we have not had that problem.
Could the NFGT leave it up to our town manager after we have a little more discussion about how we might want it to be formed?
I
Would that help us?
I think that if your motion tonight was to direct the town manager to go forth and put together a study group of the types of people that he thinks will work well for this, and taking into consideration the discussion here, then I think you're fine. If you form a committee, that's when you actually get into the open meeting issues.
Good. Okay, I think we'll probably move towards that after we have a little more discussion about scope and timeline and maybe areas of coverage for the work group. Then I want to make sure we help make sure this is a success and have some clear expectations. Councilmember Elke?
Andrew, can we just have discussion and direction without a motion?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So we discuss and direct, but without a motion, so then we don't run into the issues with open meeting laws and forming a committee. And we match the counterpart, 1 for, or 2 for 2 if they have 2 on the board, and it's not an official committee.
Generally, what that would be is that the town manager would just listen to the discussion and draw his conclusion from what he's heard. And if he's heard from a majority of the council that they're in favor of a certain proposition, then I think the town manager would understand which way to go.
Okay.
Now that our public's completely fallen asleep from this discussion because open meeting law is a serious topic in Arizona in particular, I think it's probably one of the more stringent, but it's also a topic that we have to make sure we're covered. It's just not an exciting one. Councilmember Hanson.
Perhaps Rick and his counterpart, Ron Huber, could, get together and come up with a good blend that would be balanced.
Yeah, I think that's great. I'd like to talk just a little bit about in my letter to them, which I probably wasn't shared with everybody because of open meeting law, talked about the direction but primarily was based off of that presentation and joint meeting we had with the sanitary district, and we were thankful for the expense they went through to get the consultant to look at some items. What I thought would be good is to help in making sure our expectations are being met, or there's some guidances. I don't know, let me know how council feels about looking first at a relatively shorter term with some reports back to council or to staff, and then coming before us might require some expenditures or some agreements, further agreements, but to look at some of those things that consultant mentioned about colorization, water movement, and maybe not all the big capital projects here initially, under the initial discussion. That was just my thought, to give some scope to the group, short-term and longer-term, and hopefully implement perhaps some of these short-term items, see some good results, and see how much of the big dollar items we might have to actually do, because I think some of those short-term items sounded fairly promising, but I know it was a real preliminary report that we received. Councilmember Rauke, did you have something?
Yeah, I think just generally speaking, I think it would be helpful, not only for this council, the sanitary district board, and our residents, to have some discussion between the two organizations about essentially improving the quality of water in the fountain and saving some costs. I think that's pretty much what everyone's goal really is. Yes.
Mayor and Council, I'd therefore be interested in hearing from you if you have interest in serving in that capacity. I have had discussions with Mr. Huber about the composition of this group, and certainly I think if he's going to have a certain mix of individuals on his side that include governing board members, then it might be appropriate for us to have the same thing, and I think it would just function better that way. Definitely. I was under the impression the first time I talked to him that he was going to keep this kind of a staff thing, and then that's why I had proposed what I was doing. In light of those changes that you had brought to light, I think that we need to reconsider that, and it would be helpful to me if I knew who was truly interested and available to participate.
Good. So get with you by the end of next week? Is that good for you? Okay.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense. Anyone else? Any other discussion? Otherwise, we'll ask the town manager to move in the direction which we've been talking about. Very good. Thank you, Rick.
Okay.
Thank you, Sanitary District, for working with us. Next item up is quarterly update from the town manager.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Way back in January 14th of 2010, designated 8 primary goals and 39 initiatives that we continue to pursue and complete in this fiscal year. I was pleased the meeting with our department heads today to discuss every one of those initiatives, and am very pleased to report to you that the second quarter this year saw the greatest progress toward the completion and realization of those goals that we have seen this year, as illustrated in this chart. And any questions you have relative to this quarterly report, I'm happy to answer for you.
Thank you. Nope, we're making progress. Very good. Appreciate it. Any questions related to the quarterly update from the town manager? Very good. Next item, council discussion direction to the town manager. We just had a discussion, so there's something to take with you. Summary of council requests, reports, and recent activity. Anything further?
No, sir.
All right, item 12, adjournment. Look for a motion to adjourn. And a second. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Thank you.